Hi, boys and girls. I am going to continue our read aloud of the wonderful book Elijah of Buxton, written by Christopher Paul Curtis. Now, when we were reading in school together right before spring break, we know that the preacher took Elijah to a carnival that was coming through town. And they were in a tent watching a mesmerist, and he hypnotized a boy named Samuel and was asking him to do all these crazy things. So I'm going to reread a small portion of that so that you recall where we were before we left school. 'Twas the most amazing thing. The little boy started clucking and pecking round on the stage. Then he commenced scratching at the floor with his bare feet, and you would have sworn he was digging up worms. Near everybody in the tent acted like this was something funny. None of them thought to worry what Sammy's ma was going to say when the son she sent to the carnival as a little boy came home as a giant bird, and even worse, a giant chicken. The conjurer waved his cape again and called out, "You are no longer a chicken. You are a boy again. But wait, the weather has changed. It's positively freezing in here." Why, the boy took to shivering and teeth chattering and knee knocking so doggone much that I felt a chill of coldness run down my back. And this weren't no flim-flam neither, 'cause Sammy started turning blue the way they say white people do when they're dead or just about ready to die. The mesmerist yelled, "Egads, this Canadian weather! 1 second it's freezing and the next it's like the fires of Hades. The heat is enough to kill." Sammy quit shivering and commenced wiping his brow and pulling at the collar of his shirt and saying, "Phew," so's you'd have thought he'd just got done plowing 50 acres in the middle of July with a mouse for a mule harnessed to a knife for a plow. Folks laughed and screamed so much that you could see why this cost a whole quarter of American dollar to come in and see. The mesmerist said, "And what's that I see right in front of you, young Samuel?" "It appears to be the water of Lake Erie, cool and deep and inviting." Sammy started brushing at the edge of the stage like it was covered with sand, and he was clearing a spot to spread a blanket. But afore he could set himself down, the mesmerist said with a voice that was filled up with disappointment, "Samuel, Samuel, Samuel." Sammy froze up, and the man told him, "How can you even think of relaxing at the seashore when you are just a very few feet away from bathing in this great lake's waters? You should jump right in." Sammy slapped his own forehead like he was thinking, "How come I didn't think of that?" and stuck one of his toes out to test the water. He let out a long "ah" and got ready to put his whole foot in this lake that no one but him and the conjurer man could see. Afore even his ankles got wet, the mesmerist said, "Samuel, Samuel, Samuel." Sammy didn't step no farther into the water, and the conjurer looked at all of us who were watching and said, "Have any of you here ever heard of a boy going to bathe fully clothed?" The crowd shouted out of one throat, "No!" I kept my eye on Sammy, and for a second the dumbstruck look flew off his face and his brow wrinkled, but just as quick as he went back to looking stupefied. The mesmerist said, "Of course not, particularly not when you are wearing the finest silk shirt that the most talented tailor in Toronto has to offer. Samuel, your mother would be appalled if you were to get that beautiful, expensive, and rather stylish shirt wet." Sammy slapped his forehead again and started pulling the shirt over his head. Once he had it off, he weren't wearing nothing but a raggedy undershirt and commenced tiptoeing back into the lake. But afore the water could cover even his knees, the mesmerist said it again. "Samuel, Samuel, Samuel." Sammy stopped with one foot in the air and looked back at the conjurer. "My word! Ladies and gentlemen, would you look at this young man? He is a stubborn and ungrateful lad. Not only has his dear beloved mother seen fit to clothe him in a fine silken shirt, she's also given him a silk undershirt. Please, Samuel, off with it before it's ruined by the waters of Lake Erie." This time Sammy cut a look at the mesmerist that weren't the least bit dumbstruck. It was kind of edging on being worried. He pulled his undershirt over his head, and a bail of laughs echoed round the tent. Laughing is a peculiar thing because there are lots of different kinds. There's the laughing you do at the end of a good story, the laugh you give when you're scared then find out you didn't have no cause to be, and the laughing that was bouncing round in this tent. It weren't a happy kind of sound at all. It mostly reminded me of the cutting sounds that a pack of hounds makes once they commence to ripping a possum to shreds. It was more like the sound you'd think the devil would make if he had a good sense of humor and you'd told him a joke. I weren't doing none of the kinds of laughing. I could see that if this started out being fun for Sammy, it sure was turning into something else. Ma and Pa must be right about what smoking does to a child, 'cause once his undershirt was off, we could see Sammy was right skinny and sickly looking, and though standing in front of all these people without no kind of shirt on at all would have shamed me near to death. The conjuration was on him so strong that Sammy kept on doing it. But it did seem like his enthusiasm for the whole show was getting littler and littler. He hugged his arms round himself and started back to tiptoeing into Lake Erie. But Sammy gave a long pulled-out groan when the mesmerist and most of the folks in the crowd moaned out, "Samuel, Samuel, Samuel." A hoop and a holler came out of the crowd, 'cause we were all pretty sure that even though Sammy's trousers looked like old and worn-out dungarees to us, to the mesmerists they were going to be some more of that fine Toronto silk that can't stand getting wet. "Egads, boy, I've never seen such a privileged yet undeserving child. Your mother's love for you knows no bounds. Silken trousers as well. Can you believe it?" This time, the stupefied look left Sammy, and a fearedness and shaming took over. The red from his hair started leaking down onto the rest of his face. His ears started up, glowing like hot pokers. But he turned his back to the crowd and started unbuttoning those trousers. He held up once they're all unbuttoned, but the mesmers had no mercy on him at all. He waved his cape and said, "Off with the silken trousers." Sammy gave a gulp so loud everyone in the tent heard it. Then he let loose of his pants, and they dropped right round his ankles. The crowd sucked in air, then got real quiet except for one man who hollered out, "Shucks, if his dern ma loved him so dern much, you'd think she'd have bought the boy some kind of underdrawers, silk or not." The laughs and howls and hoots must have raised the roof of the tent 5 feet, all 'cause Sammy was naked as the day he was born. And he turned red as any cardinal I'd ever seen. I'd druther have got floated into the ceiling for 2 hours than to stand there like that for 2 seconds. The mesmerist's mouth flew open and he quick clopped Sammy in the head, then pulled his cape round him and said, "The spell's over. Pull your pants up, you little chowderhead. Have you lost your blasted mind?" After they rough-handed Sammy and booted him out of the tent, the conjurer mesmerized 2 or 3 other folks, but weren't a one of 'em nowhere near as interesting as Sammy. It must have been getting near midnight when me and the preacher left the tent, and he said, "When we get to this next place, just go along with everything I say and fight that urge of yours to talk so much. Don't open your mouth unless you're spoken to." Yes, sir. We walked a little ways into the woods and sat on a couple of stumps whilst folks cleared out of the carnival. Finally, the preacher said, "Let's go. And remember, the less you say, the better." I will read aloud chapter 10, Meeting the Real Ma Wee. Look for it.